All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Carla Rentschler. I'm with Global Forest Watch. Thank you for joining today's Global Forest Watch webinar about FORMA alerts. So just a couple of administrative points before we dive right in. For our Q&A section at the end, please type your questions into the chat or question box that you'll see in the GoToWebinar panel. And this webinar is also being recorded, so if you miss anything, it will be posted to the Global Forest Watch YouTube channel afterwards. And with that, I'll hand it off to our researchers, Michaela Weiss and Brookie Guzder-Williams.
Great, thanks, Carla. So before we get into kind of the methodology and give you a few examples of FORMA, I'd just like to give a very brief history of the alerts on Global Forest Watch. So Global Forest Watch was launched just over 3 years ago, and the primary point of focus for us was on the annual tree cover loss data set, which gives kind of an updated view once a year of where trees are being lost. But when we launched, we also included a data set called FORMA, which was a collaboration between the World Resources Institute and the Center for Global Development. And as opposed to the annual data, this data was actually updated once a month and was really created for the purpose of letting people know where forest change was happening so that they could take action in real time. So this was kind of our first experience with an alert system. And as time went on and we grew our usership, we realized that people actually found this kind of tool really useful. And in particular, when working with kind of on-the-ground actors that are out in the field and could potentially respond to changes in tree cover as they're happening. So over the past few years, we've been building out additional forest alert systems. So you might have heard of our Terra-Eye system that started in Latin America, and that's a 250-meter resolution product and updates once a month. And then in the past year and a half, we've also been adding on GLAD alerts, which are produced by the University of Maryland, 30-meter resolution and updated once a week. And those are available for, I think, 16 countries right now. So as we kind of understood more and more the utility of these alert systems and started developing further the GLAD alerts and Terra-Eye alerts, as well as some others, we decided that actually the technology has advanced pretty significantly to the point where FORMA actually needed kind of a remake. So the FORMA 500 product is 500-meter resolution pixels, covered the humid tropical forest biome, and the source data came from MODIS satellites, looking both at a vegetation index called NDVI and the FIRMS fire data, and then also rainfall data. And those were updated on a monthly basis. So as we were going into this kind of redevelopment of the FORMA 500 system, there are a number of problems that we were hoping to solve with this update. So some of the biggest issues, first, the resolution. 500 meters is pretty big on the ground, especially when you're in a dense forest. So we heard feedback that it was actually hard to find where the change was happening or it was too big to be meaningful. The monthly frequency also, we thought we could do better than that given the current availability of MODIS information. We also noted that there were a number of false positives, particularly in flooded forests, that we wanted to address. The training data that we were using in order to create the FORMA 500 product was dated from 2000 to 2005. So we actually found that some of the more recent dynamics of clearing and in places that historically hadn't had a lot of clearing, but we're starting to see accelerated deforestation, we weren't really picking up those dynamics very well. And then finally, the coverage, FORMA 500 was limited to the humid tropical forest biome. And again, we thought we might be able to expand beyond that. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Brookie to talk a little bit more about the actual methodology behind FORMA 250.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Michaela. Michaela just finished telling us about FORMA 500. And so I'm going to be moving on to talk about the new FORMA product. So as alluded to in some of the issues that Michaela brought up, the first thing where we addressed was resolution. We improved it from 500 meters to 250 meter. The geographic coverage was expanded from the humid tropics to both dry and moist tropics. And the frequency of updates, and this is something we're really excited about, has gone from monthly to daily. And we'll get into how that happens. So how did it happen? Well, it began in 2013 when Hansen started putting out their data sets on annual forest cover change. The original FORMA product was also based on a Hansen data product, but as Michaela mentioned, it was from 2000 to 2005. It gave us one measure of tree cover loss during that entire period, and it was at 500 meters. This new Hansen data set comes out annually. It's at 30 meters, and so this data set alone was a strong motivation to revisit FORMA and its methodology and how it worked out. So what are some of the improvements? Well, we've mentioned frequency and resolution. We mentioned that the coverage has expanded to all of the tropics. There's also been an improvement in accuracy. And this was, this is due, we now, instead of having this single measure of tree cover loss, we have a measure every single year coming out. Having the higher resolution has helped improve accuracy. And moreover, as we'll discuss, having the annual data has allowed us to measure, get a measure of confidence in our work. Additionally, the original FORMA data set just kind of told us, did deforestation occur in large scale in this 500 meter pixel? And thanks to the 30 meter resolution of the Hansen data, we are able to actually give a percentage of tree cover loss expected. So what is the model? It's incredibly simple. It has two inputs. The first is MODIS's NDVI. If you're not familiar with this, it's a data set that gives an indication of vegetation color, and therefore is a very good product to use when looking for changes in vegetation color. It's 250 meters, and it is the reason ultimately the new FORMA is a 250 meter product. And it comes out every 16 days. Additionally, we include a second MODIS product, FIRMS, which tells you about daily fires. It's at 1,000 meters, just telling fires within a 1,000 meter radius, and it comes out daily. And so with these two inputs, we developed the FORMA model. So we start with the NDVI, and we develop a indicator of forest cover change from that. Namely, we begin by filtering the data for things that could lead to misleading information, such as clouds. We then perform a linear regression to determine the dependency of this changes in vegetation color with tree cover loss. And then we use a rolling regression to take care of seasonal effects. And we sum this up to develop this indicator called NTT, that we're calling NTT. And if this sounds a little technical here, the main point is we take a vegetation color product and then we massage it into something that is a good indicator, changes in that is a good indicator of tree cover change. We do something similar with the FIRMS data. This is the fires data, but the process is much simpler. We just take all the fires in a 2-kilometer region and we sum them up. All right, so we now have our two inputs, this fires data and this NTT data, and we have Hansen, which we're using for training data. And of course, we'd love to have ground truth data available on wide enough scale to train a model with, but we don't. But fortunately for us, we do have this annual Hansen product, and it's extremely reliable and good. And so we went forward using that. And originally, we tried some more sophisticated methods using nonlinear regressions and trying to look for the best ways to turn fires and NTT into predictors of Hansen tree cover loss. And we settled on something incredibly simple. It's surprisingly simple. And that's this. We take 4 years of Hansen data, and we take fires and NTT during those years, and we just say for a particular amount of fires and a particular amount of NTT, how much on average Hansen tree cover loss did that correspond to? And then after we take that output and we say, well, in the subsequent year, if you take that same amount of fire, same amount of NTT, and how well does that predict what the subsequent year of Hansen data will be? So in doing this, not only are we correlating the inputs, fires and NTT, with the output, Hansen predicted tree cover loss, but we're also developing a measure of confidence, and that is FORMA. That's the new FORMA product, and the output looks something like this. I have on the right the x-axis here is just time periods, and we have 3 different curves shown here. The blue that is labeled alert is what we're using to trigger alerts, and the green here is the measure of confidence over time, like how often do we think it's true. And this orange curve I won't talk too much about, but it's just a longer term trend. So rather than trying to pick up tree cover change that's happened over a short period of time to trigger alert, you're saying, if you look at longer periods, how much tree cover has been lost. Now going back to this alert curve, the actual output when you go to GFW and you see this, you don't get this full curve. You get a particular, was there tree cover loss, how much tree cover was lost, etc. And so what we do there is we set a threshold. And so once it crosses that threshold, say around here, we trigger an alert. And of course, in different areas, historically, there's very different amounts of tree cover loss. People deforest on different scales. Sometimes there's small scale plantations, sometimes it's very large, etc. So what we have here is a map of all the areas covered by FORMA 500. In the coloration here, the darker colors correspond to historically larger amounts of tree cover loss, and the lighter colors are less tree cover loss. And so what we've done in developing this model is we haven't just said, it has to have a certain amount of tree cover loss to trigger an alert across the planet. What we've done is on region by region gone through and set the measure for what triggers an alert, particular for that region. And it varies quite a lot. And the behavior in deforestation varies quite a lot. And so what you're seeing here on the y-axis is increase in fires as you go up. And on the x-axis is increases in this vegetation color index as you go to the right. And you can see for these 2 examples, one in Brazil and one in Sumatra, you really have quite different behavior. This curve here, it's almost identical. As you increase a little bit in fires, as you increase a little bit in the amount of vegetation color change, it increases the same in the predicted clearing. That's what's being shown by this color. So the yellow means more predicted clearing. However, you see a very different story in Sumatra. There's almost no change as you go up in fires. Whereas as you have vegetation color change, it seems to be a very strong indication of clearing. And this, when I first saw it, I found it surprising. I think many of us know that, Indonesia, Sumatra, it's been in the news a lot recently for the amount of fires that have been going on. And I actually, my personal thought on this is that what's happening is there are so many fires, it ceases to be a good indicator of change. All right, so let's take a look again at some different areas and some different curves and see how things change. This first row is the same thing you saw in that earlier graph. And if you isolate fires, you see as you go through time, there's an increase in fires right away. And similarly with vegetation color, almost in the exact same place, there's this increase in change of vegetation color, and it leads to this very sharp peak in our alert trend. Now in Sumatra and this next example in the DRC, you see something very different. You see that in Sumatra, the fires are actually preceding the vegetation color change. And in the DRC, you see that they come after it. So I think there's interesting insights that you can gather from some of these alone, and just how in different regions people are, what are the practices, how are people removing forests, etc. And you can see in each of these, you have very different spikes in what is tree cover loss. In particular, if you look at the DRC, the thing that's triggering the alert is going to be much, much lower. However, on the other hand, our confidence is very high. So earlier I spoke about us having daily alerts, and I also mentioned that MODIS was updated every 16 days, and I mentioned that the fires was updated daily. So you may ask, well, if MODIS is only being updated every 16 days, how are we getting these daily alerts? And here is the FORMA output for a region in Cambodia, I believe, although I'm forgetting right this moment. And what you can see on the right-hand side is the FORMA data that's coming out on a particular day. And what you see on the left is our daily increments to that. So how did we make that daily increments? Well, the nice thing about this very simple process of just correlating the amount of fires and the amount of NTT to historical Hansen is that it completely decouples the fires data from the vegetation data. And so what we do is we keep the vegetation data fixed, and every time we get a fires update, we increment our system. And you're seeing an example here. So on the right, you have the fires data for a date. On the left, you have that same fires data, but I've included in the blue for the 2 weeks preceding that date, the incremental increases we get from fires data. And so, we certainly didn't predict it all, but you can see we're picking up a lot of activity by including this daily data, which is great because it means we don't have to wait until the end of that 16-day period to put out the fires data. And additionally, we're actually putting out 2 data sets derived from the same methodology. The first is the FORMA alerts, as I've been discussing them. But we're also putting out what we call activity alerts. And so what are the activity alerts? And what we've tried to do here is a couple different things. As far as methodology change, it's the same methodology, but we put stricter controls on, how rapidly does the deforestation need to happen, and how strict are we before producing an alert. So the active clearing alerts are always going to be a subset of the actual FORMA alerts themselves. But what you're going to find is that it should be more clearing happening faster with more confidence. And so it's a smaller subset of alerts, but we're hoping that it's a way to drive people to these regions that are important. There's an additional change that is more with how we deliver the data. And so with all the previous data products, including FORMA, the current version of FORMA on GFW, once an alert is triggered, that particular pixel on the map gets associated with the date, and that is when the alert happens. And so you're ignoring subsequent activity on those pixels. And so you can imagine a situation where a pixel is 30% cleared, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden it becomes 90% cleared. And people may well be interested in that activity. So what we've done is, rather than having the normal FORMA timeline where you can go back in time and say, this happened, for the first time on such and such date, what we've done is just allowed you to select the past month or the past week or the past 48 hours. And using that, it tells you where is activity regardless of any previous activity. So it might be new activity, as I just described, on a partially cleared pixel, but it may also be a plantation that is expanding or undergoing just seasonal changes. All right, with all that in mind, I'm going to move on to some examples. And I'll start in Sumatra in a extremely, this is clearly plantation land. And I started out with this far out zoom on this one, so you can just see there are FORMA alerts everywhere here. And so here's an alert that we picked up on 5/14 of this year. And this first image I'm showing you is from September of last year. And what you can see when you look at the image from 5/14 is clearly from this date to this date, all that's happened is a change in the crop of this existing field. And we originally found these alerts with using the activity alerts, but here is the FORMA data that lives on top of that. So we're clearly picking up a lot of data, from these changes, and this is just clearly an existing plantation that's, going through their seasonal harvest, et cetera. The next, I think, is a little more interesting. It's in the DRC, and the alert date is from March this year. And this first image we're seeing is from 2016 in August. And you can see down here at the bottom is a little logging road that's coming in. And in this next image here, you can see the logging road's expanded. There's some sort of clamp here. They've expanded out this area a little more. So this is from January of this year. And again, the alert's from March. And in here, which is coming, this image is a little bit before when we actually picked up the alert date, the beginning of March instead of the end. But you can see between these two images, they've gone in and made this change. And this is clearly the activity that's being picked up by the FORMA system. And here are the actual FORMA alerts here. And this one on the dot, as I mentioned, was from the end of March. This neighboring FORMA alert here came from the beginning of March, much closer to the image date where we see the change. I've also included here the activity alert date. In the first example and the next example, I'm going to show you the date for the activity alert and the FORMA alert are the same. And here you'll see that the activity alert date is actually farther away. And this may seem counterintuitive since we're trying to get you the most rapid information with the activity alert. But remember, the FORMA activity alerts are a subset of the FORMA alerts. They're just more confidence happening faster. So you're never going to get a activity alert before the actual FORMA alert. And I think that confused people, so I just went ahead and added that. So let's move on to our final example. This is in Cambodia here. And you can see there's a lot of small scale clearing around this area. This image is from the end of January, and the alert is from end of April. And this next image is from March, and you can really see between these two images, they're beginning to expand out from this one region. And next, here on the actual same date of the alert, we managed to get a clear image, and it's just, you can see that patch has gone out exactly on top of the alert. And finally, there's the FORMA pixel. And this is my last example, but just, I should have probably said this before. This gives you a nice feel for the size of a 250 meter pixel in these clearings. All right, and with that, I will turn it back over to Michaela.
Great. So now that you have a little bit more background on the methodology, I'm going to go over some examples of how you might use the FORMA alerts and the FORMA active clearing alerts on the platform. So you'll see up on the menus up here, hopefully most of you have seen the Global Forest Watch platform before. In case not, in this forest change menu, we have a whole section on deforestation alerts, which is where you can find the FORMA alerts and the FORMA active clearing alerts. So I'm going to go through just two scenarios, and I'll start here with the FORMA alerts. Okay, so let's say hypothetically that you are a oil palm trader, and one of your suppliers in Indonesia, you're interested to see, if they are meeting kind of the rules because you are subscribed to RSPO and you're interested in sustainability. So what I'm going to do is turn on, in this country data menu, I'm going to turn on the Indonesia oil palm concessions. All right. And let's say I'm interested in kind of this block of concessions right here. So you'll notice that on the bottom of the screen is where we are seeing our timeline. So right now we're seeing FORMA alerts from between January of 2012 and July 19th of this year. So I guess that's about a week ago. And when I press this play button, we can see how this has kind of changed over time. So in particular, in 2014, 2015, we're seeing a lot of activity in this concession, and then more recently up in these concessions further to the north. And I can also change these dates. So if I just want to see what's happening, let's say from the beginning of 2015, I can select that date, and then this will update accordingly. Okay, so I can click on one of these concessions and I can see the name of the company, I can see the name, and also the area. So that's useful to get some of that more kind of attribute information. And then I can also activate other layers to give a little bit more context. So for the case of Indonesia, Indonesia actually has a forest moratorium, which places limits on where exactly concessions and oil palm plantations can be expanded. And in this legend on the left, whenever you click on one of these green eye icons, you're going to get more information about that layer. So I can read a little bit more. I can see that this map, for example, was created November of 2014. So I'm just going to change this to be from the end of November 2014 to the present. And I can see pretty clearly here that, especially in this concession, there's a lot of alerts that we've seen that are overlapping with both that moratorium area and with that oil palm concession. So as an oil palm trader, I might be a little concerned about that. Another thing I can do here, when I actually click on this concession, there's a button here for Analyze and a button to subscribe. So when I analyze that concession, we have kind of an on-the-fly process going on in the back end of the platform where we're basically counting the number of alerts within that concession during that time period. And again, I can change these dates. So maybe just look at the past since the beginning of 2017, and this number will update automatically. So I guess they had 0 since 2017. So maybe they've made a change to the way that they are producing. That might be something to look into further. And then you'll also notice here that there's a subscribe button, and I'm going to go through that process in just a second. Okay, so that's kind of a first example with the FORMA alerts. I'm going to switch over to a different part of the world and show you an example with the FORMA active clearing alerts. All right, so as Brookie mentioned, these are a little bit different from the FORMA alerts or other alert products that we have on Global Forest Watch, because instead of this timeline, we're just looking at basically the past month. So I'm going to look at the past month just so we get a little bit more points. And I'm going to zoom into an example on the agricultural frontier here. Okay, so let's say in this case that I work for a Bolivian conservation NGO, and I'm really interested to see how kind of the agricultural frontier is expanding in this area and really better understanding and being able to respond to when there are these new areas of clearing. So a feature on Global Forest Watch that I think is really useful for looking at the alerts is the tab where we look at recent satellite imagery, which you can see here over on the right. So the way that this tab works, right now I have a time period selected for the past 3 or 4 months from March 24th to July 24th. And when I turn this on, it's going to return the most recent image within that time period. It's loading here. And when I click on it, I can actually see that this is from the Sentinel-2 satellite, and it was taken on July 12th. So I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see this example better. But you can see for this area in particular, you note that there's a whole agricultural field right in this location. So what I can do if I want to confirm what's happening and if that's really been a change is I can actually look at previous images. So I'm just going to set this back like a month to see earlier, and we actually see that this this agricultural clearing was just not there. I'm going to get rid of the alerts so you can see that better. But basically, you know, we're seeing forest. I think this image is from June 5th. And then when I go forward to that July 12th image, there's this whole new field there. So I'd say in general, the alerts are picking that up. It's maybe not exactly matching the boundaries of where that's happening, but it's definitely giving us an indication of where that activity is happening. You also notice there's these other alerts down here. I didn't really notice a difference just looking at the satellite image, but you can actually click on these and get more information. And I see that this one in particular was acquired June 24th. So it's possible, since my before image was earlier than that, like maybe there's something that we're not seeing in the most recent satellite image, or there was some kind of degradation or a fire event or something that actually made this active clearing alert show up. So I think always looking at the satellite imagery, if possible, is a really good way to see what's going on and get a better understanding of kind of the context. So another thing we can do here, I showed you already how to analyze a layer that's already on the map. We can also analyze a country or a region, or we can upload a polygon or actually just draw one like I'll do now. So let's say, maybe I'm interested, I think that this agricultural field to the left here is going to keep expanding, and I'm curious to keep an eye on that. I can draw this shape, see how many alerts there were in the past month, and I can actually subscribe. So when I subscribe, anytime that there's a new alert that happens within this polygon, I'm going to get an email notification telling me how many alerts there were, what the date was, and then also have a link to come back to this map and see the new areas. So the way that we do the subscriptions is we have a system called My GFW, which you can log into with your Twitter, Facebook, or Google. I'm already signed in with my Google, so I will just subscribe there. Okay, so it'll ask you for your email address. Actually, the first time you log in, it'll ask you to provide a little bit more information about yourself, but then you'll be returned to the same screen where you can input your email address, where you want to receive the alerts. And then now it's basically evaluating which alerts are available for this area, and I can select which alerts I want to receive. So for example, I can select both the FORMA active clearing and the FORMA alerts, and then I can give it a name, say Bolivia agriculture, and I can select the language that I want to receive that email in. Okay, and then my subscription is saved. I just need to go to my email account and actually verify that I want to receive that subscription, and then I will start receiving those emails. So you will notice we do have the FORMA active clearing alerts and the FORMA alerts both available to do the subscription, and they are both updating daily. So I would say in general, I think as a good rule of thumb is just to subscribe to both. In my experience so far, the active clearing alerts are picking up more of this kind of change where there maybe has already been some activity. I think the FORMA alerts tend to be a little more conservative. But yeah, I think my recommendation would just be to subscribe to both of those data sets, and then always to look at the satellite imagery to get a better view. So with that, going to turn it over to Carla for Q&A.
Thanks, Michaela. So if you have any questions for Brookie or Michaela, go ahead and write them into the chat or questions area of the GoToWebinar panel. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to do this. And these questions and the answers to the questions asked will also be posted on our Global Forest Watch Google discussion forum, where GFW users can ask questions about the technology and the platform, and someone from the GFW team will respond. All right, so we have one question. What is the difference between Terra-I and the FORMA alerts? Brookie, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So they're similar in the fact that they're based on 250-meter MODIS data. They're both based on NDVI, but they're very different methodologies. And so the number one difference as far as the end user is concerned is we have these daily updates. So it's a big increase in frequency. But moving away from that, let's forget about the frequency of updates and just say, you know, what's the difference in what's actually being put out? And we've looked into this. I don't think a complete analysis has been done at all, but we've done some initial investigation now that FORMA is out. You know, how does one compare to the other? How does that map onto the areas we're finding? We find that both perform well, and they pick up different things in different areas. In some regions, you know, FORMA does a little bit better. In some regions, Terra-I does a little bit better. Now, something that's really not surprising, but incredibly probably useful for users is that areas where there are both, or pixels where there are both Terra-I and FORMA alerts tend to be extremely, extremely accurate. There's almost always something going on in that area. So Michaela was just suggesting that we subscribe to both FORMA and the active clearing alerts, but you should probably subscribe to all three. And I think depending on where you're at, you may find that FORMA performs much better, may find Terra-I performs a little better, but FORMA is still useful because you do get the daily information, so you're going to get more updates. But if you are in a region where both FORMA and Terra-I are doing well, if you see pixels where you have overlapping alerts, it's a really good place to start when looking for deforestation.
Great, thanks. The next question we have is why use MODIS data instead of a Landsat Sentinel hybrid approach?
Well, I guarantee you there are better approaches, and having higher resolution data is certainly a good place to go. Now, if we were to compare it to Landsat alone, I think there may be some arguments, although I don't want to say this for sure, but I feel like you're going to get different performance based on clouds and so forth. So there might be some areas where the loss in resolution compared to the FORMA data, the MODIS data is going to be worthwhile because you're going to be a little more accurate. In other regions or other seasons, it may not be true. But it's an additional, it's just an additional piece of information. And so that's good when thinking about the GLAD alerts versus the FORMA alerts. Again, I think it's going to depend on not just where you're at, but also the season of the year on which is going to perform better for you. And again, if you can handle it in your inbox, look at them all and figure out which is going to perform better. Now, the idea of integrating it with Sentinel data or even just using pure Sentinel data, it's certainly, I think, on the table. We don't have training data right now for that. We'd have to, how do you get down to that 10-meter resolution? But it's a good idea. You could take the methodology used in FORMA can be used with almost anything. So the same methodology could be straightforward applied with different sets of data. On the other hand, but this is what we have right now. And, even with Sentinel data, maybe you want to include, I kind of previously assuming we're just talking about the Sentinel-2, but maybe we want to include, radio satellites. So there's a lot of improvements that can be made as we get more and more access to high resolution data. And it's something we're continually thinking about and looking into and researching at WRI. Yeah,
just to add to that, I mean, I think the kind of long-term vision, right, is that eventually these MODIS alerts become obsolete, sad to say, but definitely at Global Forest Watch, we're moving more and more towards Landsat and Sentinel-1 and 2. But the reality is, just the amount of computing it takes to do Landsat level monitoring and also, have the appropriate training data, as Brookie said, is a challenge. So I think, this is a good data set that we're hoping will be used. And, if we are doing things right, then in a few years, either this method will be outdated and either we can adapt it to, new contexts and new data, or we can rely on other systems.
And our next question, do we use Earth Engine to retrieve and display Sentinel-2 data? And if yes, can we make it available for others as a service?
So Michaela can answer this. I think we do. The images I was showing during this talk were from Earth Engine. I don't believe that the background images on GFW come from Earth Engine.
Right. Yeah. So we're using a service called Sentinel Hubs to show the images on GFW. But I don't know, Brookie, if what you were using to display the Sentinel-2 images for the PowerPoint on Google Earth Engine, if that's something that you could share.
Oh, it's certainly, well, if you're an Earth Engine user, I'm happy to share a script that I can pull up Earth Engine data, but it's pretty straightforward. If you're an Earth Engine user, you have access to it. And I'm assuming the questionnaire, and I could be wrong, is saying, hey, I'm not an Earth Engine user, but I want some of the ease and accessibility to data from that. And there, I would say, maybe Sentinel Hub's a better choice if you're not already using Earth Engine, and but maybe it's not. You could very easily build a platform that goes and grabs tiles directly from Earth Engine, but it's just not what we've chosen to do with GFW. That does bring up something that I meant to talk about and didn't talk about at all, but I just wanted to briefly say that FORMA was completely developed and is operationalized and running every single day at this moment on Google Earth Engine. And in doing so, we've also been able to release our assets that we develop. So through GFW, you're getting the very sorts, the massage data we get out to produce alerts, et cetera. And we're going to be releasing Earth Engine assets that give you access to all the raw data that goes into FORMA alerts, which someone who is a core Earth Engine user may be able to use to develop other products of their own or develop new insights into what's going on.
Great. Another question, are certain areas of the world better covered by FORMA alerts? This user is interested particularly in Guatemala.
Maybe I can answer that. Are we still sharing? Okay. So yeah, sorry, something I should have mentioned is that when you have the FORMA alerts activated, there's a little button here for geographic coverage. So if I just go out to the rest of the world a little more, you can see the geographic coverage of the alerts. So for example, in Guatemala, you'll see that most of the country is actually covered by the alerts. Then there's areas in the Congo Basin, and then also a lot of Southeast Asia.
Another question, how fine a resolution of a change in forest cover can this process detect?
I'll take that one. So as mentioned, to trigger the FORMA alerts, we're setting thresholds. And if you remember from my slides, I had a image that showed the coverage with these different colors of blue. The darker corresponded to higher, higher resolution or more previous threshold. And so what we've done is for each area, kind of each individual area, we've said, what is the historical threshold, the historical maximum, and then we've said, at 40% of that historical maximum, we're going to cross the threshold, and after that, it triggers an alert. And we actually say, unless it's lower than 25%, and then we just trigger an alert at 25%. Now, the reason I'm saying a little bit about what we've done there is because the process itself gives those smooth curves. If you remember the graphs with the alert and the trend and the confidence. And you could really, if you have access to the raw data through Google Earth Engine, you could look at it and detect it as low of a level as possible. But when putting out a site, we want it to be useful to users, and so we have to pick a threshold that it doesn't overwhelm the user. And also, as you can imagine, as you go to lower and lower thresholds, the confidence in the alert goes lower and lower down. So if the person asking the question does have, wants to look at, these little marginal changes, and has access to Earth Engine, they can get that data, but it's too much data to kind of just hand out, in general. But you do, as you go to a lower and lower amount of deforestation, you get less and less confidence.
Great. Next question. Are the alerts available as a web feature service or otherwise for further analysis?
I'm not sure. As a web feature service, are they asking like available through an API? I don't know if the questionnaire wants to respond, but I'm not working on the API, so I'm not 100% sure of the current state. But I think the activity alerts currently can be accessed via an API, and the raw FORMA alerts, I think, are going to be added to the API. And what I can do is check into that. And Carla, you mentioned, or maybe it was Michaela mentioned, there was this Google form where we answer questions, and I can get a better answer to how to access that data and post it up there.
Great. Similar question, is it possible to replicate the alerts on other mapping platforms? So Brookie will post more about accessing the alerts on an API.
Yeah, I'm not sure what was meant by other mapping platforms there.
Yeah. All right, and another question we have, is there a protocol that GFW is using for ground truthing?
So right now, as mentioned, this has been trained on the Hansen data. And so we're able to look and see how's it performing with the Hansen data. But as far as true ground truthing, that's something we as a group are working on. And of course, we love feedback from people who are on the ground in these areas, because, this is what we need to know. We need to know, how well is this matching up? And I think Michaela knows more. I've seen stuff she's written about how accurate the Hansen data is, and clearly those are going to be closely related because Hansen has been out much longer. There's a lot more ground truth data on that.
Yeah, I would say in general, a lot of the accuracy assessments that we're doing for these kind of global products, isn't really very feasible to do at a global scale, a ground truthing expedition. So what we've done more of is looking at high resolution images and, kind of assessing the accuracy of those products. So, we definitely are interested in doing kind of a comparison, as Brookie said, like of Terra-I and FORMA, and better understanding exactly what those differences are.
One more question here. It looks like FORMA alerts are primarily based on fire clearings that bring about vegetation change. Can it also be used for other vegetation change due to drought or insect damage?
So again, there's two inputs. One is the NDVI, which is the vegetation color change, and the second is fires. And but although they are certainly related, they are not the same. And so these other types of vegetation color change should be picked up by this NTT variable. But if that is happening in addition to fires data, it's going to trigger a stronger alert. So if there's no fires in an area and there's a very strong signal coming from NTT, you're going to get the alert just from the vegetation color change on its own. However, if you do have fires in an area, you get an alert with less change in color from the vegetation.
Great. Well, it looks like those were all the questions that we have from the audience. But if you have any additional questions that you think of later on, again, we'll send a follow-up email with a link to the Google discussion forum where you can also post additional questions, and we're happy to answer them. So thanks everyone for joining today, and thanks Brookie and Michaela for sharing more about FORMA. And
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.